Everyone, this is update for November 7, 2022, day 257 of the war, end of the date update. So today we're gonna again focus on China for the strategic part or general part, and we're gonna move to the discussion of the front line and just situation in Ukraine. So um, there are more and more signs of implosion of the Chinese economy. We can all discuss the reasons for that, but there's new statistic that came out and it shows that export fell by 0.3% in October, while import fell by 0.7. The most important is export because that's your revenue. In a simplified, primitivized way, you can think this way that your revenue, which is export, fell by 0.3%, which is the main driver of the Chinese economy. Plus, as discussed before, there was a shift to sort of so-called internal consumption where average Chinese would go into debt and buy whatever they deem is necessary, either houses, apartments, or cars, and so on. But that part is sort of broken and gone. We discussed about it. There's not enough demand for real estate, which was the main driver there in that sort of consumption model. But then the main one is what really kind of holds China together and what makes it strong economic power is actually export, right? So that fell by 0.3%. That essentially never had. It's almost like you know uh, rain in the desert in Sahara, right? That's just something similar to that situation. The last time it was, I think, in Q2 2020. So everybody remembers the economy, everything was shutting down at that time. So this is again, but this time obviously nothing is shutting down, and even though they have the zero COVID policies, but it's just probably, and we can, partially could be explained by that, but partially, but the probably bigger part is the lack of demand in the world, essentially, which is also, that whole the same model that's work used to work in China was sort of working everywhere else in the world. It's the same basically model, and it's essentially breaking apart everywhere, not just China, but we can see it because it's sort of manufacturing hub of the world, so it's the most concentrated sort of picture of what's going on with the world industrial production and what also means with the consumption, right? Because all of these goods are produced to be consumed in the developed world, essentially, for the most part, plus some developing world. So this is again another stressor, another push for the Chinese leadership to figure, they need to figure out what to do. It's either internal conflict, which means civil war, or external, which means war with outsiders. So this is another sort of, as I said, pressure that pushes Chinese leadership in the direction of the external conflict. Related to this is also import of semiconductors uh, into China. So basically, purchases of semiconductors from abroad by Chinese companies fell by 13.2% for the cumulative 10 months. So basically, from January through October of this year. And they also fell just in October by 13.8%. So as you can see, the trend is getting worse. But the more important part is that it just generally, because semiconductor, and this is obviously very crude numbers because it's just number of semiconductors, and they could be, it's it's not about quantity, as actually it's much more about the quality. So the complexity of those semiconductors, so because it could be one that's super complex that sort of worth like 10,000 of their sort of something simple semiconductors, so or chips. So again, going back there, you can see this is huge drop. This is not like zero point, even there, with the expert it's 0.3. It's unheard of. It's usually like, Chinese economy always growing, expanding, and this one is really large number. And this is obviously part of it is due to the sanctions from the US, but could be also part of it is that there is just generally the demand for those manufactured goods with semiconductors in the world is going down. So again, this is another pressure and clearly another indication of sort of internal sort of implosion of the Chinese economy at all levels in industrial production and also this. And then I discussed before real estate sector. So again, then the natural reaction is okay, external conflict, and so as a sort of example of that, so there were 63 aircrafts that flew into the Taiwanese space today. So yesterday I think it was 46. So as you can see, there's Chinese leadership is kind of like training Taiwanese side. Okay, get used that this is our airspace and we can do whatever we want effectively. Then there is another piece of news is that um, Chinese I think President Xi Jinping, he's gonna visit Saudi Arabia in December, obviously to with the idea of building diplomatic ties is essentially ensuring that Saudi Arabia is going to be neutral in case of the escalation. This also kind of gives us a little bit a clue when this escalation may happen. So it doesn't look like it's going to happen by the new year. So it seems like it's going to happen. It's going to happen sometime in 2023, and then another sort of let's say data point is that the Chinese New Year is, I think, end of January or February. So that's probably not going to happen by then. So more likely than not, it's probably like spring, the earliest time this can happen. And obviously, this is speculative conversation, but there was I received some emails from one of the viewers asking like, okay, so what's the timeline for all of this? And to be honest, nobody knows the exact timeline, but we can try to sort of have the most educated guesses, let's put this way. And the most educated guess, it's probably the earliest it could be is sometime in the spring. So that's in terms of timeline. Then there is another related development to all of this. As you know, there's BRICS, where it's essentially at this point, this bloc is headed by China. Which means Brazil, Russia, India, China itself, and South Africa. So that's just like sort of potential. It's kind of like very loose alliance, where it's obviously some of the countries such as India, they are natural rivals of China. So it's very unclear what's going to transpire there, but I think what Chinese are hoping for that India simply will be neutral, which could be sort of okay from the Indian perspective too. But the more important part is that another country wants to join it, which is Algeria. This is country in North Africa, sort of straight south of France over the Mediterranean Sea. And not a problem, but what's going on there is that Algeria is a big supplier of natural gas. It's probably second largest after Russia. So if it's shuts it down, then the situation is going to get really dire in Europe. Also, Algeria has extremely strong military ties with Russia. Essentially, all, well, not all, but majority of the equipment of the Algerian army is Russian. So as you can see, there is this alliances are sort of quietly being built. Also, potential sort of candidates for this sort of Chinese allies And I'm not saying that they are going to be there, but let's say, sort of short list, I guess maybe we can say that. So it's obviously Iran because it's obviously ally already of Russia. So this goes without question. Then Argentina, Saudi Arabia, as we discussed, and then Indonesia and Egypt and Turkey. Turkey probably, I would say, least likely out of this, but this is also sort of potential, kind of like potential allies of China. So as you can see, there is a lot of active movements being made by the Chinese leadership to strengthen its diplomatic clout internationally, and it's obviously done in preparation of that invasion. So that's all for today on China. Let's actually switch to Ukraine and see what's going on there. In terms of the energy distribution system, it still works. There are, there are attempts by Ukrainian companies to sort of fix what they can to kind of like make it a little bit more stable. To what extent that's possible is unclear, because if you don't have transformer, there's not much you can do, honestly. And I'm not like that deep expert in this energy distribution system. There probably is something at the margin that can be done, but the problem with transformers is that they usually custom made, and it takes year to year and a half to make them. Um, so the situation is definitely sort of on the edge. And if there is another round of Russian attacks, which doesn't happen, and who knows, maybe there is it's left for later. But if there's another successful round of attacks, the system will probably collapse. There is also a report that Ukraine is getting this NASAMS anti-air systems, and I think ASPID and Hawk and so on. Unfortunately, the number of those systems is simply not enough to effectively cover the air, or cover to provide cover for all of the potential targets or energy distribution system. Not to mention that if you really think in terms of cost effectiveness, all of these weapons are much more expensive than the single Shahid 136 UAV. So, and that's where there is big problem in terms of Western military industrial complex, that it's producing extremely expensive uh, pieces of equipment, and it may work, but if you have enemy that produces a lot of sort of pieces of equipment that are could be potentially very effective, your cost effectiveness is totally not there. You just simply cannot afford to shoot with NASAMS at Shahid 136. It's just too prohibitively expensive. Basically, you can shoot down like Russian ones, because each rocket costs at least a million or two, three, four, $5 million. So there is sort of point of doing that. But as we understand, that's why actually Russia switched to cheap Iranian solution, because exactly it's cheap and it does the same, and as a result is, and there is actually result is the same, or could be even better. So they increased the effectiveness of the whole thing tremendously, basically. So that's all for sort of energy situation in Ukraine. And in terms of like how much sort of time Ukraine without electricity, it's about varies by region, but it's about like 8 hours out of 24, could be up to 10 hours. So that's a situation. Now let's actually do a walk through the front line in a clockwise fashion. We're starting from the north. Situation along the state border is more or less stable, with just some minor exchange of artillery fire. Now let's jump to North Luhansk front line, and things here are pretty much the same. unsuccessful Ukrainian attempts to push through Russian defenses, which are becoming sort of harder and harder to overcome as Russia is getting more and more of those conscripts. At the same time, Russian side is trying to attack even now here Yampil. So as you can see, that's not terribly far away from Liman, which was liberated. It was such, was presented as big sort of success, liberation of Liman. But overall situation is just status quo without without essentially much with any progress by either side. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. So I just wanna so things here are all also very similar. All of those attacked by Wagner mercenaries. So I just wanna actually there is more information of their area of responsibility. So it starts here at Verkhnyo-Kamensk. So this northern part most likely is Second Army Corps, which is used to be occupied Luhansk territories. So basically, people from some volunteers, some conscripts from that region essentially. But the rest of it, as you can see, is covered by Wagner mercenaries. So and it goes almost all the way to Kurdyumivka, right? So this is a really large front line. So we can really assess the size of the Wagner of this, because it's not entire thing, right? But at least what's present in Ukraine. This probably pushing 20,000 people, maybe like between 15 and 20,000 soldiers on the ground. Just this group that's in Ukraine right now, right? Because there is more going on in Russia. They're preparing more. So this is just I wouldn't say it's tip of the iceberg. Maybe it's a sort of larger part of the iceberg. But at least it gives sort of idea of the size of the Wagner mercenaries. At the same time, just want to add that sort of formal owner of the Wagner mercenaries, which Prigozhin, he's extremely active politically in Russia, and there's a lot of discussion going on that he might be successor of the current Russian president Putin. At least that's the impression a lot of sort of internal, how to say, analysts are having. But that's not sort of set in stone. It's just there is definitely clear ambition on his behalf to sort of become next Russian leader. That's what is clear. To the point that some people even suggest that he might be crossing dangerous line where he could be removed because he's overly sort of too much of him basically in the media. But nevertheless, he definitely has ambition to be next Russian president. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on here. On central Donbass front line. So things here again, there's almost like a broken record. So all of these attacks out of this Novobakhmutivka salient, then there is Piski salient, then attacks in Marinka and at Novomikhailivka, all the same without much progress. Then attacks in Pavlivka. So there are more images. So because Russian propaganda is trying to sort of play down all of those losses. I don't know if you've seen, you can easily search for those videos from the fighting there in Pavlivka, and and this time this is example of Russian horrific way of attacking. So before I was criticizing how Ukrainian troops were attacking on Kherson bridgehead. Now this is this is actually example of the sort of Russian command of how not to do things. Let's put this away. Just criminally insane what's being done, and it's actually amazing that people sort of follow those essentially criminal orders and just go to die without questioning anything. Now let's move to quickly check what's going on on Zaporizhya front line, there is not much happening here. It's the same situation. So no news here. And let's finish with Kherson bridgehead. Things here also stable. No large Ukrainian attacks, and the same is true for Russian side. Ukrainian command or troops are trying to attack Russian supply lines. At the same time, there is satellite videos showing up that Russia manages to assemble new sort of like groups of boats in order to supply Russian troops on the bridgehead. Again, this is kind of like a you know slow motion, but basically death by thousand cuts, where Ukrainian side is slowly destroying the means of supply, and but Russian side is basically assembling, sort of finding. So it's all civilian boats, motorboats. At some point, the resource of those will sort of exhaust itself, and again, the question will be very clear of like what to do next. And as I said before, this is going to be lost, just a question of time. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.